Good morning. We'll call to order the Public Protection Judiciary Committee meeting and ask for roll call.
Chair Fiedler.
Present.
Supervisor Adams is excused.
He's excused.
Supervisor Leaf.
Present.
Supervisor Ramberg.
Present.
Supervisor Carlson.
He's excused as well.
Okay. Yeah, we don't have a quorum, do we? We have a quorum.
Kathy moves a 100% pay increase. We have our minutes. Are there any adjustments to the minutes anybody has? If not, they're approved. Any public comment today? Public comment? None today. We'll go to our business items. Turn to the administrator, Mr. Witt.
Yeah, the financial report, which is in your packet, will take just a couple of minutes and go over a couple of things on here. So this is year end. There are still a few adjustments that need to be made yet. If we look at very sensitive. Go up here, I can control it better maybe. There are a couple of adjusting journal entries that still need to be made. But when we look at like circuit court, what we'll do is we'll jump down and we'll look at this fiscal year 23, it's the third one from the right column, and we look at the bottom number. So if it's red, that's bad, and if it's black, that's good. So this one is red, it's 107,000. Part of it, though, is $100,000 of revenue that's yet to come in, so that'll greatly change. So that one will mostly flip back around. Yeah, somebody needs to mute their computer, probably Amy. So the clerk of courts, we look at the same thing. They're negative 23,000. It's really probably mostly just some of their expenses have been higher. We've been talking about public safety. You've heard me drone on and on about it, but the complexity of cases really drive a lot of witness fees and additional prosecutors and all kinds of different things that are also affecting the clerk of courts. So they're up a little bit. We get to the medical examiner. They're in the black. Patty's off the hook. We get to justice support services. They're negative 162. They have some additional revenues coming in. They have both the TAD grant additional revenue coming in yet, their last quarterly reimbursement, and they also have some of the federal ARPA dollars coming in yet. So they're not going to regain all of that. They'll still end up in the red, but a lot of it will be offset. The district attorney's office, he is in the red by 86. Again, we go back and we look at, well, what's really up for him. You look at witness fees, so they're way up. And again, the complexity of the cases that we have are really driving some of these things. So what we do is we monitor those. 2 years ago he spent $3,500. Last year he spent $464, and this year he spent $40,000. So hopefully that's an anomaly year, and we get back to the regular. But if not, we adjust the budget based upon historical averages, and we'll start to adjust those to catch up to these increasing costs when they become trends, not when they become outliers. Child support, they're negative 225. So again, they're expecting some additional grant revenues. They're missing a big chunk of their revenues yet for the fourth quarter, so once they get that, that'll turn around mostly. Law enforcement, so they're at 418 in the red. Mouse is very sensitive. So if you look at theirs, what we're mostly looking at, it's not so much the wages and fringes. They were up by 134,000. It's just some of the other expenses that they ended up having. Really, a lot of them are just higher than they have been in previous years. So again, we'll watch for these historical trends. If you look back at the last few years, you note that departments have pretty consistently been in the black. This year we have a little bit more of a trend that we're in the red. I think it's really two things probably. One is things are getting more expensive, so inflation. The complexity of public protection is getting more difficult, so you see things like witness fees going up. And then also we're getting tighter on our budgeting. So we're trying to get closer and closer to the number that we would expect to have. And when you're off at all, then you end up with swings like this. So the corrections department, they're 155,000 in the black. Emergency management, they're 74 in the red, but they're missing one of their state grants yet. So once that comes in, I think they'll be in the black. Emergency communications, they're in the black. And that was it for the public protection departments. So you will see there are a number of them that are in the red and probably going to end up finishing in the red this year. Okay. Supervisor Ramberg.
From a bean counter perspective, a lot of those grants take a long time to process and into the new year. And in the spirit of closing the books for the auditors or whatnot, do we book those as a receivable and then get the revenues correct? Or how do we go, or does it vary a lot?
Yeah, so we keep the 2023 fiscal year open for recording of those revenues. So when we get it in March, we will book it back to that calendar year's financials. So we're only February 1st. We haven't received them yet, so you're not seeing them recorded yet. But when they are recorded, they'll get booked back. The auditors will be here in May, so we'll have all of those entries made by the time the auditors get here. Thank you, Chair.
I see no other questions. Thank you, Mr. Witt. Our circuit court update, Judge Needham.
Good morning. Not a lot to report. Maybe if you noticed when you came in that our jury assembly room is up and running. We are now on our third jury trial after opening that particular component of the new construction. And obviously the reason is very apparent. They would have been not able to use this room, and so Christy would have been scrambling. So we've been hearing very positive feedback from jurors. Christy, I know, and IT worked diligently last week to get things up and rolling because I had a trial on Monday, Judge Black had one yesterday, he's got one today, and I have one tomorrow. So it's being put to good use. We're fully staffed now in the Clerk of Court's office again. Christy was able to secure a qualified applicant, so she is fully staffed. Judicial assistant, we had a person who lived in Eau Claire and was commuting and took a job more local to that area. So Judge Waterman was able to secure a new judicial assistant to the detriment of one of our local law firms who left her legal assistant position and joined Judge Waterman. We continue to meet for our judicial engagement project. I think I've told you that's a project that we're receiving assistance from the Children's Court Improvement Program out of Madison, as well as Judge Todd Ziegler, a judge from Monroe County. And they come up quarterly and meet with the department, the judges, corp counsel, the district attorney's office, our guardian ad litems, and we try really to brainstorm and creatively look at things that we can do to improve primarily child protection, but also juvenile justice. If you saw the news yesterday, you're aware that all the major tech folks were grilled by the Senate Judiciary Committee about abuse of the internet as well as various platforms, and I'll just highlight that judges are now finding we are likewise becoming the subject of those types of issues. There are YouTube channels that have been created for at least all of the judges in this county. Websites are being created for some of us that include what I would characterize as very disturbing commentary about individual judges. And so we're aware of it. More recent entry also included a judge's family in the posting. And so the sheriff is aware, judges are aware, and maybe feeds into what Judge Nordstrand and the legislative committee of the courts are trying to do, and that's get better judicial security legislation passed, which would include keeping our names out of public websites, keeping our names private, our addresses private. So Mr. Zuckerberg and others who were grilled yesterday, if I had been there, I might have had a few questions as well. So with that said, that's our report.
Judges, and directly related, maybe it is directly related, but we had corresponded last week, and you'd mentioned you'd just been down to a judges conference. Could you tell us a little bit about some of the highlights of the judges conference that were maybe worthwhile passing along?
Yeah, I'm trying, the November? Are you referring to the November conference?
Oh, I thought you mentioned you had just been to a conference last week.
No, no.
I misunderstood something.
But we are hosting all of the area attorneys next week. They come in once a year for a lunch, and they sometimes have questions prepared for us, areas they would like us to discuss, or the judges then highlight for them, you know, what's new, what's coming, and we generally find it to be a really valuable exchange. Attendance, usually 40, 50 attorneys show up, and we have that luncheon with them, and we're using the jury assembly room to host them this year. So,
You know, I know Judge Nordstrom was also down, as you mentioned, well, maybe, I can't remember who mentioned it, but Judge Nordstrom was down in Madison last week testifying before the, on judicial security, and maybe we could take this part of the time instead of the restitution portion of this. I wonder if Judge Nordstrom would like to comment on his testimony and what the state is doing and what we can do to be helpful.
So I serve on what's called the Legislative Committee of the Wisconsin Judicial Conference. It's a committee set up by the court system to monitor legislation that affects the judiciary. Generally, it's, you know, we're not policymakers, but we look at legislation to see what trouble it might cause or opportunities it might create for judges. After Judge Romer from Juneau County was killed in 2022, the Chief Justice set up a task force and charged our committee, the Legislative Committee, with coming up with legislation for judicial security. So there's about, I think, 8 or 10 circuit judges on our committee. It's chaired by Justice Bradley, Rebecca Bradley, and other justices regularly participate, the court's director. Anyway, we spent a year and a half working with the Legislative Reference Bureau to write 3 bills that address judicial security in Wisconsin. They basically do 3 things. One is they attempt to keep judges' personal information confidential to the degree possible. Now, this could be part of that, you know, cows out of the barn and you're closing the door afterwards kind of situation. But there are ways to try to lock it down. Now, if you start figuring out think about where all your information is out there in the web and elsewhere. It is a daunting task to try to find it all and then write legislation to try to limit it, access. But there's a bill presently in the Assembly and the Senate. It was introduced to give you a sense of the priorities, I think, of the legislature. It was ultimately introduced 2 weeks ago. It had a hearing in the Assembly Committee with jurisdiction last week that I testified at. It has an executive session today to consider amendments and pass it out and send it to the Committee on Organization for bringing it to the floor. I think it's a priority for the Speaker, and I think it will pass the Assembly in very short order. The other 2 bills, one of them addresses picketing at judges' residences to try to influence the judge. It would make that a Class A misdemeanor. Unlike public officials, some of which we have here, the public is certainly entitled to try to influence your decision-making process. They are not entitled to influence judges' decision-making processes, and so this reflects that and puts limits on it. And the last thing was, and this is particularly a benefit to our sheriff here, is judges prepare security profiles, detailed information about our houses, our families, our pets, our garage door opener codes, all kinds of stuff that we provide to law enforcement where the judges happen to reside. In my case, it's the sheriff right here. And there has been an opinion, an informal opinion from the Attorney General that it may be a public record that somebody could ask to have disclosed. Seems like a bad idea. So there's a bill to make sure that judges' security profiles are not subject to public records requests. Now, and this is, as you might imagine, there are many circuit judges who will not fill out the form because they're afraid someone's going to make a public records request for it. And so this will help solve that problem. Anyway, I'm going down again next week to testify in the Senate. Because I'm the vice chair and Justice Bradley is not participating directly in this, I'm the lead judge, I guess, representative of the court system in terms of advocating for this, and I'll spend time going door to door with some legislators. So just an update on that. It's sort of other duties as assigned. So.
Very, very important other duties. Questions for Judge Nordstrom or Judge Needham? Nothing? Thank you for that. Oh, we have our CASA update next. Mr. Kinsella.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to present to you. I really wanted to take this moment to do a look back at what happened in 2023. So that was our first full year of fundraising. And our forecasting actually was spot on. We had two major variances that had nothing to do with CASA. It had to do with foundation. One foundation moved its award date and its process review into 2024, which was beyond our control. And then there was a glitch in some federal money that was in a pass-through to an organization that was held up. So nothing to do with us and nothing we could do about it. So barring those two, our forecast would have landed spot on, which is kind of a nice thing to have. We did put out an annual report for those that were on our email system. If you weren't in our email system, you wouldn't have received it, but it is available on our website. So I wanted to kind of highlight what we saw and what our expenses were. So really, when we break down our expenses, we had three major categories. Program, so that's how we, that's everything from recruiting, supervising, and training the volunteers and helping the volunteers execute their duties. That was about 67% of our budget. Then there was administrative costs. That's me minus fundraising. So because of our federal grants, we have to divvy up my job responsibilities into very discrete pools, and that is required through the federal dollars that we receive. So we held our fundraising expense to $10,000. That fundraising expense is not reimbursable by those federal grants, and that's why we specifically have to carve that up. And then overall, our revenue came in as, like I said, we predicted, minus those two variances. So all in all, we had a very good year for our first year of projecting. So I am proud of the way that turned out. This year, our budget is going to grow. We're in the process of hiring a second volunteer coordinator. Our ability to serve children is very dependent on our fundraising and our staffing. It's a really direct ratio, and when you try and put more cases on a coordinator, things begin to fall through the cracks because there's a lot of oversight that's needed for volunteers who are not professionals. They're coming in and donating their time, and so it does require a lot of support on the backside to make sure that those volunteers provide meaningful information to the judges. So the other thing that we're going to be doing this year is we're hiring a couple contractors to come in and help us. We can't hire them as employees, but we can give them limited duties. So that is one of our goals this year, and there's a very big federal grant that we're going to be pursuing. So one of those contractors will be a grant writer who is familiar with securing federal grants. So that's kind of what we have going right now into the near future. We're around 22 children being served. The changes that have been made to bring in an assistant corporate counsel are really beginning to move cases much faster. And so I'll be honest, we had a whole bunch of cases that went through, and I haven't had a chance to read and see which ones closed. But we're around 22 children right now, and we're about 22 volunteers currently. So that's really about it. Any questions?
I don't see any immediate questions, but maybe we could just go over just a little bit more some of the money issues.
Yes.
And just share with us just some raw numbers in terms of where we think we're going, how the fundraising particularly is going relative to the goal for 2024, and we'll go on from there.
Yeah, so none of the grants have come to term for 2024. So those will start in March for us. Our grant cycle will start in March. And this year we have about 47 grants that we're pursuing. So we're taking a big leap forward in trying to secure those. Some of those have to be vetted. Some of them are brand new, so we have to do a pitch first and see if we get invited to submit a full grant proposal. But we have targeted some grants there. So that's really the biggest portion. We will be having our Stand Up for Children, Stand Up for Kids event in May. We're still working on securing the date. We believe it's going to be, though, again, at the White Eagle Golf Course. They did a very good job for us, and we know we need more servers next time. It was a little slow, so that'll be something that will change. And then the sponsorships, that's the new thing we're going to really put some time and effort behind. It was a rush job last year, but and we missed when most organizations budget for their gifts, which is January and February. So the vast majority of organizations won't do a sponsorship after that time frame. So we'll be targeting that in the next month.
Maybe I could just ask, I'm sorry, Judge Needham.
And this is obviously more of a comment. At our judicial engagement team meeting this past week, the number of kids out of home right now in St. Croix is around 75, which is lower. It ranges generally between 75 to 110, 120. So we're still have a lot of kids out of home, but I guess we can say it's less than what it was a few months ago. And so when you hear we have 22 advocates hooked up, there's still a void that we're trying to close. Sean is very active in his outreach and trying to recruit volunteers. He's coming to my church this Sunday. I did an introduction last Sunday, and I think hopefully we'll snag a few volunteers from New Richmond. I know he's spoken likewise, I think, at the Methodist Church and to the Catholic Church as well. And as I shared with my congregation, out of those 75 to 110 kids, the vast majority, are not from the Hudson area. But that's where most of our volunteers are from, because this is the nucleus for starting the program. So we're really trying to engage our other communities in Richmond, Baldwin, Woodville, Glenwood City, where most of our kids are currently being housed out of home. So that's one thing. And then I'll just also share that the information we're getting from these CASA volunteers is information we've never heard before. And that's not a criticism, simply a benefit of the program. We get the reports and we read them before we either go in for a permanency plan hearing or revision hearing, and they're sharing information that is critical to decision making. And as Sean said, maybe it's also leading to quicker reunification, which is the goal. We want kids back home. We want them permanently placed. And so, as I said, from our standpoint, what we're getting from the CASA volunteers is invaluable.
Johnson.
So I'm going to share one story without any details because we can't do that. But I had a case recently where not only was the CASA volunteer essential for information, but they were essential for providing support to the child that had to make a very difficult placement change. And everyone in court said it would not have happened but for that CASA volunteer's intervention. In other words, the social worker, I mean, I've never seen anything like it. The guardian ad litem, the social worker, corporation counsel all took time to thank the CASA worker for helping get this accomplished. And so it's beyond, because of that relationship. You know, if you're seeing somebody every week, week in, week out, you're in their home, you're with the child, they develop a trust that can then be translated into action. And in this case, it was quite amazing.
Well, that's a good news story. Just to pursue the finances just a little bit more. And I'm doing that only because several of our colleagues at our board meeting that we'd had in October and November had particularly asked for information on CASA, where it was going, because of their concern that they didn't want it forever to be funded by the county, but we're hoping that it would be on a trend line toward receiving those grants that you talked about, and it would be self-sufficient within a reasonable period of time, a couple of years. So with that perspective, can you throw out just a general number that either from last year or this year that what is your goal? What did you receive last year? I mean, things are in the mix obviously for this year on grants, and lots of things could happen at the end of the year. But what's the goal this year? How are we progressing toward it?
So our goal last year was 187. This year it'll be 258. We're bringing on more staff. So right now we're budgeted for 2 part-time positions that'll be brought in. One begins March, and the other one will begin fourth quarter. The big thing, of course, is I have to fundraise for those salaries. So we see that big bump. We are going to accomplish that through, number one, our events, more grants, and definitely going after sponsorships from organizations, businesses, for-profit businesses that don't have foundations. That's what we call a sponsorship. Some of the for-profits do, like your Walmart, your Quick Trip. Some of the banks have foundations also where they give through. So anything that's called a sponsorship is coming from a non-foundation organization. And I guess that's where I would say that is predominantly where that's going to come from. We definitely received the 100,000, and we'll be anticipating the 200,000. We tried to build our budget without that money to see how we would do. And so that money will be there if the grants don't come through. Last year, we realized a 33% award rate for everything that we submitted. And again, a lot of that is because of our age. For example, and some of the grants some of the foundations won't even work with you until you hit a certain dollar mark. So Fidelity Foundation, for example, you have to have $1 million budget for them to even entertain you. And your ask has to be $100,000 going into program. So we're still working on that. I think it's becoming a bigger issue these days. Almost all the grants are now asking our age, where that didn't used to exist. I've been in the field for a long time, and age seems to be a big issue now. They just don't want to play with younger organizations because they deem it to be a higher risk. So I do believe that money will be essential. I would anticipate that we will have probably a slightly better award rate than we did last year, but I don't think we're going to see 100% award rate. So that's where I think that money will come in to support us.
Supervisor Ramberg.
Yeah, thank you. And in looking at your annual report, just from a big picture kind of aspect, I noticed that our expenses were about 160 and our revenues 180, so we're positive. moving forward on a cash flow basis, 162.9, I think, versus 181. And then looking at what you budgeted 187, and revenues were 181, good. I mean, that, just from my perspective, I like to look at the big picture that way on the numbers. And as a growing organization, I see 163,000 or so that you spent in or that your activity was 163,000 about. And growing, you're looking to grow that to 258,000 with all of these wheels that are in motion. And that's kind of, am I wrong with that kind of picture as how it's growing?
Yep, no, you're 100% right. So one of the things that doesn't come out in the budget is we did hold off on hiring someone last year, partly because we didn't have the revenue to support it. So that's why we're experiencing it right now. An offer was made yesterday, so we'll negotiate. The negotiation starts now. So I'm kind of a tightwad, I'll just say, and we really held our expenses last year. So that's partly why we saw the positive numbers. Is I'm not one that just goes out and spends money.
Well, thank you, and that's kind of what, from my perspective on the board, like to see that the year-end report shows a positive, it's not a deficit, which
That's right.
we were, there was some fear of that, which is good. And number one, $20,000 positive moving forward, and then the growth from the $187,000 figure to the 258, and where you plan on getting those funds, and that's what I was looking for. Thank you.
Thank you.
Supervisor Leaf?
Supervisor Ramberg and I had the same report up on our computers. So he asked the questions I was going to ask, but I have another one for you. So the 7 that achieve permanency. So what happens after the child is placed back in their home? I'm assuming there's a lot of follow-up for a period of time, or not. What happens?
I'll take.
Well, I can share at least one story because it's a volunteer from New Richmond who I saw at a Christmas event, and she was lamenting the fact that her child was going home because technically that meant her relationship was going to end, but then she shared with a smile that even though the child was going home, they were going to maintain contact, and she would continue, to do some follow-up and not work, but just maintain that relationship. So I think that may be the case with many of our volunteers, that they develop a relationship. It doesn't oftentimes end because the child's going home.
I think that's great, and for everyone involved.
Yeah, so I think permanency is different than the services endings, and there are a lot of different outcomes possible. We have children who've been reunited and are living with the parents, but services continue. And so long as the court is involved, CASA is involved. Typically, there is a very short transition period if the case closes. We don't want to just cut off the CASA. Our experience has been, though, now, with the cases that we've observed, is everyone's like, yeah, this is great, let's continue this. And within 2 months, no one's responding anymore. Like, no one returns calls or emails or texts. The kids move on fast. And I think it's important to really identify that this relationship is established in a power differential, right? This is being ordered by the court. It's a court-ordered service. The CASAs are coming in and absolutely advocating for that child, but it is an intrusion into that family's life. They actually have to block out time for CASA to come in and meet and make sure that the child is doing well and that the needs of the child are being met. And so when that stops, I think initially people are like, yeah, this is great, but that time slot quickly fills up. The kids have things that they're doing. They're running off playing with children. The parents have clearly things that they need to get done. And so it's not turning into a long-term mentorship is what I would say. And I can tell you from the CASA standpoint, it's very painful. A lot of them are struggling with that. They feel kind of abandoned, right? And I'm like, this is really a good thing. So we're trying to really explain that. There are some cases that do terminate really quick. And if the child moves away, then there's of course no way for the CASA to get out there. and they just have to do it through, text or phone. And so there are multiple outcomes, is what I would say, that are tied to reunification.
Sean, thank you for your report this morning. It was very positive. Things are moving along very nicely. I think we're meeting the objective that some of our colleagues asked for roughly a quarterly report. This is our first quarterly report. I think you did a great job. Nice annual report that you did. And based on the judges' comments, I think they're very pleased with what's happening. My only thought was that for our next quarterly report, and I don't know if this is appropriate, so I'll turn to our administrator and ask him, but perhaps if you could, if it's feasible and proper and everything else, to work with the administrator and the financial director, maybe at our next quarterly report we could get something in writing on the finances, and maybe in a format that they're familiar with and that we're familiar with, just a general outline how we're going, and just so that we can see that continued trend as you've suggested. It looks very positive, and I appreciate all you do. Thank you.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's nothing to present for 2024 yet.
Nope, that's why next quarter.
Today would be the first day of the
Absolutely.
month.
We
So,
understand.
Sorry about that.
Will that work with you, Ken? Great. It works for the administrator. We're on. Judge Nordstrom, Restitution Court.
So the chair asked me to give a short presentation on restitution court. Restitution court's just a name for a process that we're doing, trying out in branch 1 of the 4 circuit courts. I want to start by saying that all 4 judges have different ways of doing things. I decided to try this to see if it would be of help in helping to collect restitution. We'll talk about what that is in a minute. But I just want you to understand that each judge has their own method of doing this, and I'm just describing the way that I've chosen to try to consolidate efforts and do it. So first of all, what is restitution? Restitution is court-ordered compensation to a victim that's required as the result of a criminal case. In other words, there's a judgment of conviction, there was a victim in the case, there was a process that the court went through in which it determined that the victim was entitled to some compensation, and then that became part of the judgment of conviction. And so the defendant is required to pay that money to, and we'll get into who. It could either be the clerk of court or it could be the Department of Corrections, and then that money is then paid to the victim. And so this is a real important function of the courts. And in terms of victims' rights, it's also required by our Constitution. In particular, our Constitution says that at Section 9M, Paragraph M, that a victim is entitled to full restitution from any person who's been ordered to pay restitution to the victim, and, this is an interesting thing, and to be provided assistance in collecting the restitution. So that's where that last phrase sort of struck me, that the court perhaps could provide some assistance to victims seeking getting paid, so to speak. Now, there are basically three statuses that come before the court in terms of restitution. And so if somebody is sentenced to a straight sentence of jail time or no sentence at all, but there's a judgment of conviction that includes an order to pay restitution, it would probably be a fairly minor offense, or one for a county jail term for a relatively short period of time. But there's some money owed to, let's say it's a theft, a retail theft, and you owe Walmart $500 for what you stole. And so that's one situation where you're under the supervision of the Department of Corrections. You just get a jail sentence, and there's an obligation to pay restitution. So that's, and I'm going to tell you how we deal with each of them in a minute. But so that's situation number 1. Situation number 2, which is also very common, perhaps even more common in restitution cases, is people we withhold sentence and place the folks on probation, supervision under the Department of Correction for a period of time. Might be a year, might be a couple of years. The minor offenses that often involve restitution, like check fraud and theft, etc., generally are shorter time frames, usually a year or 2. Depending on the case. And In that situation, these folks are supervised by the Department of Corrections, and we set conditions of supervision, which include pay your restitution. The third type of defendant that has restitution obligation is somebody who's been sent to prison. And when they come out of prison, they're required to be on extended supervision for a period of time. It's kind of like probation, but it's after a prison sentence. And there are conditions that are imposed by the judge at the time of sentencing that they have to follow when they're back in the community after a prison sentence. Now, in that situation, and they could owe restitution. Now, that's a little more complicated because the restitution, you have no idea as a judge really, 3 years from now, are they going to have a job? Can they pay? How will they pay? And so it's a little difficult to order, for example, a monthly payment plan for somebody who's going to prison. So how do we collect these? What are the tools that judges have? Well, the tools that they have are really two primary tools. For the first and the last situation, we don't have the ability to impose a sanction on the defendant other than through the use of our contempt powers. In other words, you've been ordered to pay. It's a court order. If, for example, the district attorney's office were to file a motion before me and say, Joe Blow isn't paying their restitution and they're on extended supervision, the district attorney could ask me to hold them in contempt, and as part of that contempt process, I might sanction them if it was requested, say, for a few days in jail to motivate their interest in paying restitution. Those are the least common situations. What our restitution court does is focuses on people that are on probation. In some ways because it's more common, in another way it's because it's easier to manage. So here's how it works. One of the conditions of probation, that when somebody goes on probation, let's say it's a check fraud case and they owe $2,000 to the local bank because they wrote some bad checks. So what will happen is I'll order, if proven up, the restitution. I'll order they have to pay $2,000 in restitution. And then I will set them up on a payment plan, which the statute authorizes me to do, based upon the length of their probation. So if they're 2 years, I'll take the $2,000 and divide it by 24 months, and that's your payment. I have other considerations. The statute requires me to consider their ability to pay and other things like that. But in general, if it's a reasonable number, that's what I'll do, okay? And so then I will order them to participate in restitution court. That's what I happen to do. And what that means is they're going to come and see me every couple of months in restitution court, and I'm going to check on their payments. I'm also going to likely impose and stay some conditional jail time as a condition. In other words, I'm going to say 60 days in the county jail imposed as a condition of your probation, but I'm going to stay the whole thing, because if you come to my restitution court and you haven't been making good efforts and you haven't got good excuses, on a Friday afternoon, you're going to likely go visit the sheriff that afternoon for the weekend to try to create some additional motivation that when you get out on Monday morning, you're going to get that job and you're going to start paying your restitution payments. So I wanted to go over what the tools are that I have, that we all have as judges, because that created, I thought, the opportunity to formalize this. And so in my branch, I've taken all of the cases that are folks on supervision for probation, and even a couple of extended supervision cases. And I put them all into restitution court. There's about 40 to 50 folks, and we see them periodically. If you're interested, there's restitution court tomorrow at 3 o'clock. You're welcome to come up and see it. I know some county board members did. It won't be quite so busy as last time. We've got about 20 folks, not 40. 40 was a little much last time. But they all come and they all tell me their story, and a lot of folks are done in 2 minutes. They made their payments, we verify it, we send them on their way, tell them when their next hearing is. I'm going to pass around, here's my standard restitution order. You get a sense of, we just fill this out and we let them know, where they're at, what do they owe, what's their payment, If we've got to impose some condition time because they aren't paying, that's reflected in there. If we issued a warrant because they didn't show up, that's reflected there. And it creates, I think, an opportunity. Now, I'll tell you, I've been doing this about a year now, a little over a year, and I honestly have never had on a Friday afternoon to put anybody in jail for non-payment. Now, there have been a few people who've had to go to jail because they didn't show up and I issued a warrant. So that happens, but I've been pleased with the fact that people are fairly compliant and they actually make their payments. I'm also going to pass around, I need to get this back, but this is a spreadsheet from a couple of months ago that we maintain. My judicial assistant, Jennifer, does this for me. She's fabulous at this. And she maintains a list of the restitution clients that we have in terms of the defendants and what their status is, who they owe, how much they owe, when their last payments are, et cetera. And so we use this as a tool to just keep track of what's going on in restitution court. Now, I want to close with, I guess, so that's what we're doing. And I think it's been helpful, and it's a process. Now, there are issues that restitution court and restitution all over faces. And I think this could be the subject of potentially some changes. One legislator's actually called me about restitution. Representative Tussler called and had a nice conversation about maybe some things that could change, help our process. And I gave him my thoughts. But one issue we've got is we're on the border. And so when folks this one isn't lit up either.
Terminal illness.
You broke the internet.
No. Oh, there we go.
Try it.
Oh.
All right. Well, but the Minnesota issue is this. Because folks are transferred to Minnesota, the interstate compact that they operate under. So the interstate compact specifically says that the agents in the other state that are supervising folks from Wisconsin can't deal with any financial issues. Can't collect money. You'd say, well, that seems silly. Why would you do that? I don't know how. The interstate compact is what it is, and so we've got to have people back in Wisconsin trying to collect the money, and as you can imagine, if supervision is over there in St. Paul, they're not paying a lot of attention to that, though I think they make some efforts. So that's problem number one, and so I solve that problem because if they've got a felony conviction and they don't show up to my hearing, I can issue a warrant and they get called back over here across the border and we talk to them and we try to convince them to pay. So that's a helpful thing because of that problem. The other problem that we face in restitution court is a priority that the DOC, Department of Corrections, restitution is not, I don't want to say, I hate to say it this way, it's not the top priority for DOC. It is a priority. But as a result, for example, folks are not going to get revoked from probation for not paying restitution, best I can tell. So that doesn't rise to the level of, say you commit a new crime or something else goes on that could result in your revocation. It's not, I don't think that non-payment of restitution is going to do it. Now, in some cases, the resolution of the case, that is the plea agreement that was set up, I mean, Carl has had to leave, but you know, a lot of the reason they're on probation is simply to pay restitution. You know, for the bad check cases, they put them on a year or two of probation just to make sure that the victim gets repaid. So if that's not a priority, it's problematic. So that's why restitution court and whatever other kind of supervision that judges do to see that restitution is paid can be helpful, and that's what I found. Now, the other thing that happens, and this one I just found out, you were there when I found out some of these things, is I've got the folks in front of me and they paid their $50, and so I'm happy, right? Except the $50 went to Chippewa County. Because DOC's got one account for that defendant, and they put us on a list of priorities. And so if my case is priority number 5, until 1, 2, 3, and 4, and all these other counties where restitution is owed is paid, the victims in St. Croix County don't get paid. So I don't like that. So I'm working on that. But it's a bigger problem than you think. One of the things that could potentially solve it, and the way some judges solve it, I'm told, I'm not going to identify the judges, they're not in this county. Other counties, the statute says if you put somebody on probation, you have to have Department of Corrections collect the money, okay? Required. Some judges simply say, pay the clerk of court anyway. And you know, there's really nobody to appeal that decision and to get it overturned in Wausau, and so they pay the clerk. What I think might be a good change in the statute is to give the judge the authority to have restitution paid to the local clerk, because then I could just say, part of my restitution court or my original judgment and conviction could be you pay our clerk the money, and then it doesn't go to Chippewa County. So that's another issue. Anyway, I think that's what we're doing in restitution court. And again, if anybody's interested in coming up and checking it out, I'd be happy to have you. And so, if you've got any questions, there you go.
Supervisor Ramberg.
Thank you, Chair. And this maybe, I don't, is there one of the tools able to, like, if they have a job, to do a withholding, like you do child support and whatnot? Is that one of the tools, or, I know they're not learning anything from it, but.
It is a tool, I think, but it's not used very often. I mean, it isn't used by the Department of Corrections as far as I know. But a victim can use that kind of a tool. See, ultimately what happens, and here's the end of the story, is, for example, with somebody on probation, what the statute also says that may or may not be helpful is that once their probation is done, I am required as a judge to convert their restitution obligation to a civil judgment. And then it becomes a civil judgment that's enforceable. My interpretation is it's enforceable by the court as well as the victim, as a civil judgment might be in any civil case. And so I can assist the victim, I believe, in that process. But the other thing I can do, and I regularly do, is if they haven't made the payments in their 1-year probation, I can extend probation until we get payments. There's a limit to that. Under the case law suggests I can't keep them on forever. But if they're making good efforts, but basically DOC will ask us to extend probation so we can continue to get payments. So anyway, I think it's been helpful. And anything else?
You answered my question about my point about the other counties and how we're not always up to time. That's
Yeah.
frustrating.
Well, I'm going to try issuing an order, see what happens, that says all the payments that come in restitution court have to go to St. Croix County. I don't know what DOC will do with that. The local office managers had no idea how they would respond, but we'll give it a try. That's what I'm going to do tomorrow. So, and I don't know, Judge Needham, if you've got any comments on this, or.
Well, as Judge Nordstrand said, we all have our ways of monitoring and trying to enforce these orders, but I agree with them. Our biggest challenge are the Minnesota probationers. And 9 times out of 10, when I get a request to discharge and restitution not been paid, it's probably a Minnesota defendant. So you know, I use a different approach to make sure that restitution orders are being paid and monitored.
Okay.
I would just say, a couple of us, as you mentioned, did attend your restitution court in December, and you had a couple of graduations, as you do in treatment court, and they were nice events where you presented a certificate of graduation to them, and they were very happy people, that's for sure.
You know, one thing I'll close with. I started this, I assumed it was and that's true to large, but I've been surprised that there are people who never met their obligation, probably showing up in court, taking the and they're actually happy. Help. That's they're having taken. And the guy is actually legal. Actually, smiling and happy, tell me about how he's making his spouse Ron, and he's happy. That was kind of sort of a treatment. Changed their attitude.
Thank you, Judge Nordstrom. It's a very interesting pilot program that you're running, and we'll look forward to hearing more about it in the near future and working closely with all the judges on how we proceed from here. Our next item on the agenda is our medical examiner's report.
Well,
Ms.
thank
Schachter.
you, and good morning. What's going on at the medical examiner's office? Right now, we're interviewing for CT techs and investigators, so we should be able to get our staff right where we want it in the next couple of weeks. We have our PO in for the Randox. So when you think about the Randox and how that's going to enhance the work that we do, 95% of the deaths that we do, at least, are natural unexpected deaths. First, we have to rule out trauma. We use the CT scan to rule out trauma. Second is then we have to rule out an overdose. So we send toxicology out and do an overdose or do a blood tox. Takes 3 to 4 weeks to get that back. Costs $262 per test. And this past month, we sent out 7 different tests. All of them came back natural. So it was well over, $2,000. With the Randox, we'll be able to get a quantitative and qualitative reading within 20 minutes that's accurate and be able then to expedite our death certificate processing in our natural deaths here in St. Croix County, which is really one of the biggest issues we have with the natural deaths is family have to wait for the certified death certificate, and it can't be done till we rule out everything. We have to triage trauma, triage the overdose, go through the medical records, what we saw at the scene, et cetera, et cetera. With the Randox, we're going to be able to sign off death certificates within 5 days of the death, which is going to be a huge thing for families, but more so, if we look at what that means in cost savings, we're going to be able to save over $20,000 by doing our drug testing in-house. And it's accurate. If something comes up and we find out there's fentanyl or meth in the system, we can alert law enforcement right away. One of the things that we're seeing in our drug testing is, that comes back 3 to 6 weeks later, is we have a lot of recreational, that's what they call it now, they're not addicted, it's recreational drug users. So they test positive, but there's nothing at the scene that would indicate that there is drug abuse going on. So this is something that we'll be able to get this information right when we get back to our lab. That's going to come in at the end of March. So this Randox system is going out. There's 3 other counties in Wisconsin that are going with this. It's just kind of going on all over the United States, and it's a very proven testing. One of the things that we worked on last month, we have our unclaimed bodies that continues to be an issue. But we had one that was a veteran, and his family literally did not want to do anything for him. There was a lot of family dynamics. So Phil and I took it and just, started working on how we were going to get this figured out. And Phil did end up delivering the remains to Fort Snelling. So he is someone here in St. Croix County who died in St. Croix County, who had no family or relatives, who was a veteran. He, whatever his history was, it's not something that plays into what we do, but there is a need to make sure that folks are buried with dignity. So he is buried at Fort Snelling, and I believe the actual burial is going to take place in the next couple days. So we were pretty excited about that, to be able to do that. When we have a new intern program that's going up with UW River Falls, and then I'm going to be speaking at some of their classes. You have the preliminary annual report in a new style that I sent you. You can see a lot of the trends, what's going on. We have a class coming up in April. We're going to have national speakers, and it's all about the CT scan and how it's used. We have speakers coming in from New Mexico, Puerto Rico, and Milwaukee, so it should be a really good class. And then I just applied for the Northwest Area Health Education Center internship grant, and if we get that, that will be, I signed up for 2 people because I could, and maybe someone else will need some help in doing some data stuff, but it's free, and these interns get paid the whole time. So, keeping those folks working around here is really exciting, and then plus we get information out of it. So that's all I got.
Supervisor Leaf.
Really? It'll work. Oh. The Randox, can you tell me how it works and how it works with the CT scanner, or how it all works in tandem?
So right now we take a blood sample, we do 2 12 mil tubes of blood and send it off to National Medical Services, and they're the ones that do the tox. The Randox we'll have a centrifuge and everything right in the office. We'll be able to take blood from that sample and put a couple drops in and get it done, and it spins out, and you'll get all the results with a quantitative and qualitative report within 20 minutes of submitting. And we'll still have that sample that we can send out to expand out. So.
If there are no other questions, that completed your report, Patty? And again, thank you. Every time you make a report, there always seems to be an example of something like the gentleman who's going over to Fort Snelling, and I think we all appreciate the thoughtfulness with which the deceased are treated, and in addition to all the data you provide us. Thank you. Anybody else? Nope. Okay.
Simply as an aside, Chairman, it's taking us months to get drug test results back for a stop where there's suspected drug use or otherwise. So I just asked the sheriff, does the crime lab have this technology? Yeah.
Next item on the agenda will be the resolution approving law enforcement agreement between St. Croix County Sheriff's Office and the Village of Star Prairie. And I was going to turn to the sheriff, but I don't know if the administrators are about to address it, or the sheriff would like to. Sheriff. Thanks, Judge.
So we've been approached by the Village of Star Prairie for quite some time. Historically, their agency has operated under solely part-time officers. In my entire career, there's never been a full-time, and I don't believe prior to that there was a full-time. Always part-time. And in the state of law enforcement today, it's very difficult to find part-time officers. So, and without a consistent go-to for them, there were concerns with oversight, policies, procedures, and just regular operations and liabilities. So they've decided to reach out to us to see if we could contract with them, similar to how we have several contracts throughout the county with certain townships. You know, Troy Township, Star Prairie Township. But this will be our first village, so to speak, for contracting. And part of the process is the involvement with the county administrator and the legislative board here to approve that. So with that, I can turn it over to Ken a little more about the nuts and bolts of it.
Yeah, it's really just the resolution approving it, because you're using some of our resources, you're dedicating them to the village. So we need your approval as the county board to do that. It probably made it a lot easier that we've added 8 patrol deputies in the last year. So the impact of this is really a half of one of those is what we're sort of pledging to be in the village. I think the flexibility of that, though, is if there's a call, they're going to come off of that assignment anyways. So I think it'll work out fine for the sheriff for scheduling wise, but I think because of some of the changes we've made, that's made this a possibility.
Sure.
And you were, really, and you were providing coverage anyway, because if there was a call and their part-time person wasn't available, you would go anyway, I'm assuming.
Yeah, we were still, you know,
Right.
as citizens of the county, we were still responding to any calls for service. And they were taken as any calls for service. We prioritized them. They were never left out and with no responses. You know, what they're looking for is, you know, they have a number of traffic complaints, speeding in the village, you know, quality of life things that they'd like to have more attention given to. And with 4 or 5 of us in the entire county, we couldn't really designate it to that village, and that's kind of what they're looking for. But we will always, and if we're working, as Administrator Witt said, if we're working that shift and say there's a crash between Star Prairie and Richmond, we'll jump out of the village and go to that crash. We'll then modify the billing back to them. So they get billed for what happens within the village, but emergency calls, we still pull resources to respond to those emergencies until they're secured.
And I think just 2 quick, obvious questions. One to the administrator, financially, this works for you?
It works great if you look at the financial report that we had for the sheriff's department, where we had that red number. This will be a number that adds revenue.
Exactly.
So I like that.
And just a question to the sheriff, you endorse this as well. The department can handle this without cutting back on law enforcement to any significant degree to other elements of the county?
You know, as Administrator Witt said, it helps now with extra bodies coming on. And that was really one of our, and Star Prairie's been chomping at this for maybe 2 years. I mean, it has been a significant time, but because of our current staffing and our other townships and concerts and other special details, we just didn't have the manpower to do that. Now, we're not going to necessarily pull people off of shifts. This will be overtime. So the guys that are regularly scheduled to an afternoon shift, that's still going to be out there working the county. Star Prairie will be extra. That'll be, yes, yes.
And for clarification, does this resolution then give authority or jurisdiction to the county? Because I seem to remember challenges of you don't have authority to give me a ticket on a town road questions as far as a county. Is that, I don't know if that's true, but in the village, would there be a challenge of a motorist that doesn't think a sheriff's deputy has the authority to give him a ticket kind of question?
That is a good question, and there is some, you are remembering correctly. So we can enforce state laws anywhere in the county. So the sheriff's office can pull anybody over in any jurisdiction for a traffic issue. How we cite them is really where that falls in. Within jurisdictional areas such as the city of Hudson that has a court, municipal court, they have ordinances that they operate under. So within the city of Hudson ordinances are what can be charged by Hudson officers. We can still come into Hudson and charge somebody with a state charge, but we cannot charge them with a county ordinance, because a county ordinance within the city of Hudson does not work. So you are correct in that, and I believe there is an area in here that recognizes
Sheriff, I don't think it's in there yet.
number 14.
Well, I think the village grants us the authority. It's not the county granting the authority. They have to grant us the authority.
Us the authority to enforce their ordinances.
Correct.
Do you see that in here, Heather? I know I just read it.
It typically is an attachment to this document. I'm trying to find, and I don't see that we have an attachment to. And so, for example, with the towns, they give us the authority to write citations for the specific town ordinances that the sheriff agrees to enforce. But did you find it?
Under number 5, the last sentence, should the village be required to adopt the county ordinances to comply with this paragraph, they agree to do so.
If there's no further discussion on that, we do need a motion to bring the resolution to the committee.
You have a working mic.
Oh,
I'll make the motion.
I'll second it.
Supervisor Ramberg has made the motion, Supervisor Leaf has seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, we're ready to vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The resolution is adopted. The last item is the sheriff's update.
Sorry about that. I handed out our quarterly statistics from the end of last year. You'll see a snapshot of that. Next meeting, we'll have it in the packet. So you see for the last quarter of 2023, the cases reports, you'll see the two different groupings, Sheriff's Office quarterly case statistic. The bottom part this one work? I don't have the comparison to last year, but I will in our year-end report, which will be coming in the next couple of months, and that'll compare the entire year. Actually, I think we usually do the 3 years, just to look at the trends. Even in that quarter, the last quarter, we ended up with 6 fatalities. There was 1 double fatality and then 4 single. We've had 1 fatality this year in January, and then unfortunately we had a pedestrian struck last night, which makes our 2nd fatality already for the year in 2024. So not a statistic that any of us want to see increase at all.
Any further questions for the sheriff? Sheriff, I appreciate your coming up with these statistics, and and look forward to working with you on this, because it does give us a good statistical picture of what's happening and the magnitude of what the office is doing. I know I'd shared some things with Justice Support Services earlier, just by suggestive data that may come forward. I don't know if they shared that with you, and if you think it's worthwhile sharing with us if the data is reasonably available, it would be helpful, just to see, for example, in the, I suppose it would appear in the top part, a breakdown on the drug-related arrests, or types of drugs, or things like that. But I'll leave that for further discussion. And whatever we do, we want to get a good picture of what's happening, but we don't want to cause undue work either. Any other questions for the sheriff? Sheriff, any other things you'd like to add, or all?
Just in the announcements, I'll announce one thing.
Okay. That completes the business portion of the meeting. And a request for future agenda items. I don't, just under, I don't know if it comes under this exactly or not, but Kathy, is there anything that's going on with Health and Human Services Board that we would want to be working closely with them on? Or?
I think things have improved since
Okay,
last month,
all right.
what I'm hearing.
Great. Next item is announcements and correspondence. We'll turn to the sheriff for his announcement.
We have there's a hockey game this Saturday at 3 o'clock in Richmond, and it is a continuation of the fundraising for the Honor Katie group. And they're going to be auctioning off jerseys. All the players are going to have jerseys with Katie's number, Katie's name on it, and I think it's going to be a very nice event. The family's going to be there, and we were looking forward to it. So 3 o'clock in Richmond at their hockey high school arena.
Great, thank you. I'll just look at Amy and to see if there's any correspondence she'd like to report on. If not, we'll move on. No, I've got this. Yeah, right. So relative to an announcement, a nice announcement, and it's from Lisa Plunkett. And we've got a very nice picture here in front of me with the governor posing in a very beautiful room down in Madison with one of our own, Chad Wolski. And the caption on it is that Chad recently met with the Governor Evers, and he was presented with a plaque in honor of and appreciation of your exceptional commitment to child support program by the Wisconsin Child Support Enforcement Association. So I'd just like to turn to Chad at this point and say, Chad, tell us a little bit more about what happened and what this was all for.
Yeah, so a bunch of the legislators and Governor Evers supported the child support program through this last budget cycle. So our system's really, really old. It's green and black screen, if you guys remember that from back in the 90s. We've been working on getting a replacement done. The feds are on board. They got approval there, and the last step was the state portion of that, which got approved, and then they added $5 million of GPR to help local child support agencies as well. So we gave Mr. Evers a plaque through the Child Support Association, which I'm a director of. We also met with a couple of the legislators. So Cameron Zimmerman in our area, we met with him as well and gave him a certificate of appreciation as well. But it'll help fund the child support program. That's what we were looking for as an association. And then the biggest thing will be the replacement to the state software system. I think it's supposed to be completely built and released within about the next 3 years or so. I know they're doing the final contract with the vendors that got approved through the RFP process. So I know that they started hiring, and I think they start development in July is expected. So, yep, so it was a good day. It was interesting. I hadn't been inside the governor's office before or in the rotunda before, so that was sort of interesting to see. And obviously, shook a bunch of hands, took a few pictures, and he's a lot taller than I thought he'd be. I didn't realize that he was over 6 foot, so it was sort of interesting.
Well, I'm sure the governor was very pleased to receive that, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you for all you do always, and Lisa in the Child Support Office. Appreciate it. Is there any other business we need to quickly take up under announcements category? Hearing none. I'm not going to adjourn quite yet because the date of our next meeting, we had talked about that a little bit in January if we needed a March meeting. And I would maybe just quickly turn to some of the people that are here. We've lost the judges, but does, Patty, from your perspective, do you think we need a March meeting? Sheriff, or does anything, I mean, we can always hold one if something comes up, if there's something that's needed.
So then there wouldn't be a meeting until
There wouldn't be a meeting in April because we would just be forming then, so we would not be meeting till May.
And
So-
then it might be different people.
Maybe different people. So unless the administrator thinks for purposes of the financial report we needed something, we could always send something out, right? Just a monthly report that you send out to us reflecting that, and we can get any updates that are required that way. So just very tentatively, and I think we can make a final decision on this. I'll consult with our other two members to see if they've got any issues that are important to them, but if they do not, then I think I'm leaning toward the idea that we probably not have a March meeting. And so I'll be back in touch, and the administrator will send out any official announcement on that sometime in the next week or so after we've reached our two colleagues. With that, we're adjourned. Thank you.